I am Dave Litton, and a warm welcome to my brand new 3-video set, PRINCE2 Issue Management Demystified. Now, if you have had an opportunity to already scan the PRINCE2 Official Manual, then you'll know that issues, much like risks, seem to be everywhere. Your instinct would be correct if you turned immediately to the Change Theme, because that, after all, is where issues and change control emanate from. But I'm sure you've already found out that that's not the only place where you need to understand how issues are managed within PRINCE2. Indeed, it also crops up in the Progress theme for good reasons, and you'll find it getting mentioned in most of the processes. So my objective of this 3-part video is to give you the full story of how issues are managed within a PRINCE2 project. That said, let's get stuck in. And starting at the very beginning, an issue is defined as any relevant event that has happened, was not planned, and requires some form of management action. If you like, an issue is a surprise. It's something that we weren't expecting. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. In most cases, an issue has already happened, as it says here, but it may be a situation that if you don't fix it right now, it's going to get worse in the future. So staying with PRINCE2 definitions, an issue can be a request for change, often raised by a customer, but it could be from any other stakeholder, wants to change what was originally agreed, often called an RFC. Another type of issue is an off-specification. Now this type is where you get some form of product error or an omission. These are usually found either during the design and build of a product or in its testing, when you realise you can't meet, for example, the original specification. The third type can be a straightforward problem. Something's cropped up and it needs to be dealt with. Another type of issue could be a concern. This might point the way to some future situation which will arise if we don't do something about it now. But it is important, since I would see a problem is something that is with us now, whereas a concern is something which may occur at some point in the future, even though it's still an issue that needs to be dealt with right now. And the final flavour of issue, if you will, is a good idea that is yet to be implemented. Now, the official manual doesn't make much mention of this, merely saying that it could be a problem or a concern. But there's no doubt about it, much the same way as risks come in 2 flavours, a negative threat or a positive opportunity, then so too an issue could be a great idea. Why don't we do it this way, someone says. Fantastic, but we're not doing it that way. Well, let's raise it as an issue and see if we can change the way in which we're going. That would be a good idea. So I've just mentioned in passing risks, and it's important right now at the beginning that we differentiate clearly between a risk and an issue. So, a risk is an uncertain event or set of events that, should it occur, there's the key word, it may not, will have an effect on the achievement of the project's objectives. But the key here is that a risk has not occurred yet. We merely suspect it may. Now, a risk and an issue are not the same. However, what is important is that one could cause the other. For example, if a risk actually occurred, it could throw up one or many issues that need to be dealt with. By the same token, you could have an issue that is raised, and as a result of analysing that issue, you can see that risks have changed for the better or worse or different. So there is a relationship in the real world between risks and issue, but it's important when we're learning about how to manage these things that we differentiate between the two and see that they are fundamentally different. Now, since issues and changes are inevitable, believe me, it'll be very unusual if you get from the beginning of a project to the end and not a single issue is raised. Then you need a systematic approach in order to identify issues in the first place, assess or analyse them, and then go on to control them. So that the aim of issue and change control is not to prevent changes. Please understand that, a key point here, but to ensure that they are first agreed by the appropriate authority before such changes are implemented. You've probably heard of the term scope creep, and this is where small changes are suggested and they're implemented without being first agreed, and they can sum to a total where the project ends up failing or being cancelled. So as a key point here, we're not trying to prevent changes, and remember that a change is a particular type of issue, but PRINCE2 makes sure you have a process in place so that they're only implemented once the full impact is understood and they've been agreed by the appropriate authority. More of that later. Now, because I'm going to talk about issues throughout the entire PRINCE2 method, I think it's important just to spend a few minutes going through and reminding you, if you will, what the processes and timeline of a typical PRINCE2 project would look like. Here we've got the portion of time before the project begins. Then you've got the first stage in PRINCE2, a management stage, which is always the initiation stage, and then at least one or more delivery stages. Here I've shown 2 delivery stages in this simple example, and this obviously being the final one. And remembering also that there are 3 levels of management, if you will, within PRINCE2. There's the directing one, covered by the project board. There's the managing one, which is the project manager. Then you've got the delivering level, which of course is the specialist team. Now you can use as many delivery stages as is needed. That's part of tailoring PRINCE2, of course. So starting with the first process, starting up a project, or SU as its official acronym is, that occurs pre-project. More of each of these shortly. The second process I want to talk about, indeed it's the second one that comes on stream, is the directing a project process. This is where the project board lives and breathes, if you will. And I've shown it starting before the project starts, because part of SU is to appoint the project board executive and the project manager, and certainly design the rest of the project management team, including the other 2 roles on the project board. But since this line here at the end of pre-project is the formal start of the project, we need the project board in place, or more importantly, we need the directing a project process to make sure that the right decision is made to proceed or not. In the initiation stage, this is where we create the project initiation documentation, or PID as it's called. And the process here is initiating a project, or IP. And as we come towards the end of the initiation stage, the PID plus the next stage plan is presented to the project board for approval or otherwise. And to create the next stage plan, we need to use the process managing a stage boundary, or SB. Now, in some complex or high-risk projects, you may use 2 other processes, the controlling a stage process and managing product delivery. This is not normally done, but it is something you need to be aware of. What we're saying here, you may need to create some specialist products, for example, putting together some form of specification document, or even creating some prototype. Okay, so let's imagine we've now got approval to move into the first delivery stage. This is where the controlling a stage process, that's the project manager's domain, comes into play, where the project manager will issue work packages to the specialist team, either directly or through a team manager, one of the optional roles, and the specialist team use the managing product delivery process. It's called a delivery stage because this is a stage where the specialist products, rather than the management products, get created. Again, at the end of this stage, we'll use the process managing a stage boundary to get approval or otherwise from the project board to proceed to the next stage. And in my particular example here, this happens to be the final stage. Again, controlling a stage is used along with managing product delivery, where the team will create the specialist products. But this being the final stage, instead of using the managing a stage boundary SB process, we actually use the closing a project process to actually shut the project down in a controlled manner. So a little quick refresher here of the processes in play. This will help us as we go through the next videos to put issues into better context. Okay, so starting then with the most obvious, and that's the change theme, where you would expect that issues and change control hence actually occur. And as you've probably gathered already, issues and change control are like brother and sister. They both work very closely together. You'll be aware that there's something called the issue register, which is set up to help manage any issues. More of that shortly. So, sticking to the change theme, the purpose of this is to identify, in the first place, assess and then control any potential and approved changes to the baseline. This, of course, includes all types of issues. And as I've said earlier, let's say it one more time, it's important. An issue is defined in PRINCE2 as any relevant event that has happened, was not planned, and hence requires management action. Now, the other thing you need to talk about here is configuration management. Indeed, this particular topic takes up a few pages of the PRINCE2 manual, and quite rightly, because configuration management is at the heart of managing changes and issues. It's there to record baselines. A baseline is an agreed plan or set of plans or information for the project's products. So to recording such baselines for the project's products, is a prerequisite of effective issue and change control. Indeed, configuration management really is mission critical. And to make that point, why indeed should you bother using configuration management? In terms of Prince2, configuration management really refers to version control. That's an important point. And therefore we need to put some controls in place, tailored as appropriate for each project, that help us manage and control these issues. There's issue reports, issue register, and something called the daily log. More of those very shortly. These are the controls you put in place to make sure that configuration management and issues are managed effectively. One of the terms you may have come across is called a configuration item record. Now, configuration management does have some rather long words. Don't get put off by this. What it's saying here is for every single product that you're creating within a project, there should be a unique record. Much the same way as we have birth certificates and information on credit cards and passports and so on. And within a configuration item record, here's my point, there is a section which covers issues and risks, documentation, product description, and so on and so forth. So the configuration item record plays a part in our story of managing issues throughout a Prince2 project. Again, we'll visit this shortly. Staying with configuration management, another piece of jargon, if you will, you'll come across is the product status account. Now, it's really a report. You could have called it product status report. Therefore, the product status account is something that is requested, typically by project assurance at the end of a stage, and also could be called for by the project manager during a stage. And what it does, it shows the true status of one or more sets of products. And within that, with regard to issues, there's something called the product status. And it may include a list of related issues, plus any changes, those pending or approved, and of course, risks. So you can see the product status account plays a key part in our story about how to manage issues. Now, status accounting, you can see it's related to the product status account report itself. The definition of this is the reporting of all current and historical data for each product via a product status account. There it is. Used at the end of the project, yes, quite right, at the end of each stage that I've mentioned, and when examining issues and risks. There's the key point. That's why I've included configuration management within this set of videos. Still staying with the change theme, let's look at the responsibility roadmap. I've got a few of these to show you as we talk generally about issues later, but let's just talk about the change theme. The project board executive, they are responsible for setting whoever is the change authority. It may be the project board, they may set up a change authority as a separate entity, and approving, if one's put in place, the change budget. And the project manager would have two things to perhaps consider in this, and that is that whether a change budget would be a good idea, particularly in projects where it's expected or anticipated that there will be lots of changes. It might be good to put a separate pot of money aside to help manage those. If not, then the change budget could form part of the project and stage budgets. It's the executive, however, who's responsible for deciding how this is going to occur and what sort of budget is put in place. The executive also sets the scale for the priority and severity of issues and risks, by the way. Now, it may well be that such scales are already in place in your organisation, in which case the executive needs to say not much more than we'll use the normal ones. And the executive's there to decide on any escalated issues, with a focus on the business case. We'll see later how the other members of the project board, such as the senior user and senior supplier, are also involved in helping to manage issues, but with the executive obviously thinking about the business case focus. Now, escalated issues are those passed up by the project manager to the project board. Here's the senior user. They, of course, represent the user, the customer side, if you will, and they're there to safeguard benefits from any escalated issues. For example, a request for change may not have been raised by the senior user at all, and therefore the senior user needs to be involved, or at least informed, of the impacts of such changes and whether that's a good thing for the user community. In a similar way, the senior supplier acts the same, but this time from a supplier perspective, safeguarding the solution integrity. Remember, the senior supplier is responsible for the technical integrity from any escalated issues. Again, it could be a request for change of functionality. For example, the supplier would want to make sure that that is being safeguarded appropriately. Who else have we got? Well, we've got project assurance. That's the responsibility of the project board. They may choose to delegate it, but for now, be aware as an entity, project assurance is there to advise on examining and resolving any issues. The project manager, of course, is at the heart of everything. They are there to create and manage aspects such as configuration management. Now, do they do that themselves? No, very likely that'll be delegated to project support in terms of the administration or using some central system. The project manager is responsible for issue and change control. We'll see how the project manager is centre stage here in the coming videos. And the project manager is there to implement corrective actions. Do you remember I said that an issue is normally something which is a surprise, it's happened now, it'll have an impact. The project manager will always try first to see if they can take any corrective actions to minimise or remove any negative impacts. Of course, the issue register plays centre stage here, as we'll find out shortly. Continuing, what about project support? If you haven't got project support, I guess the poor old project manager will have to do it themselves, but they're there to administer configuration management and also for issue and change control. They would maintain the configuration item records, do you remember those? And to produce the product status account, which is really a report, as I've just mentioned. Who else have we got? We've got the team manager. Now, the manual suggests that the team manager is an optional role. Well, yes and no. I'll be a bit pedantic here, but I would say that you always will need a team manager. The only decision you've got to make is whether the project manager manages the team directly or whether they delegate it to another person. So for the sake of this slide, if there is another individual, they would be there to make sure that any corrective actions the project manager has asked, they're there to implement any corrective actions. Now let's circle back to issue types and the relevant authorities. I've mentioned already a request for change. This is a proposal to change a baseline. Baseline is an approved reference of some aspect of the project, whether it's a plan, a specification, a product description, and so on and so forth. And we'll learn how issues can be formal or informal. And whenever a request for change is raised, it must use the formal approach, which means an issue report will be raised to bring it to the attention of the project board. Now, the project board, when given a request for change, have got some choices to make. And by the way, this will happen in consultation with lots of folks, including possibly the project manager and even the specialist team. They can either agree, approve the request for change, and by the way, this isn't done in a vacuum. For them to approve a request for change, they'll have all the details necessary in order to make an informed choice, or they may reject it, in which case that's the end of it. It's merely archived and no further action is taken. They may, for one reason or another, decide to defer the decision. Perhaps right now, in this particular stage of the project, there's not sufficient information to know whether it would be a good or bad thing. And they may decide to wait until the next stage, or wait until some time point, days or weeks from now, for obvious good reasons. This is not merely, we don't want to make decisions. This is merely saying it would make sense to wait. The other option they've got is to request more information. Perhaps they haven't got enough data in which to make an informed choice on, in which case that is gathered for them, given to them, and then they'll make the decision. Or it may well be, if the request for change shows that to implement that would breach tolerance. Now, I haven't talked about tolerance yet, but you understand that PRINCE2 does management by exception, and there are various levels of tolerance applied. There's project level, there's stage level, and optionally there could be team plan or work package level, if you will. And a tolerance is a plus or minus amount of some relevant metric, time or cost, quality or what have you. And if a request for change shows that that would be forecast to be breached, then the project board would ask for an exception plan from the project manager. You see, the exception plan will say in detail exactly what needs to happen in terms of changed budgets and times and what have you. So this gives the project board better information about whether or not to approve or reject this particular request for change. Now, an off specification, which you'll remember, is a situation where we can't produce what we said we could in terms of a product or functionality or some such. And again, this is something that is within a baseline, but right now we're pretty sure that we can't give them what we originally promised. You'll see a similar set of options the project board has got. The first one is important to mention, grant a concession. This is where we're saying, okay, I know we asked for this, it looks like we can't have it, we'll take what you can give us, which means they're conceding they'll accept what you can give them. And often that's a very sensible thing to do. We're delaying it, and asking for, let's say, redesign would be too expensive and too long. They could, in this case of an off specification, instruct it to be resolved. For example, the design said that this would accelerate at some speed, and tests are showing that it doesn't reach that, but if we put a larger motor in it or something, or redesigned it in some way, it could. That's the resolution action that will be sent back to the project manager, who would then raise a new or modify an existing work package for that to occur. Similar to above, they could defer the decision for the reasons I've discussed, or request more information, or indeed ask for an exception plan. So the last three steps here are the same as the three up here. So what about a problem or a concern or an opportunity or a good idea? Well, if it's something the project manager could deal with, they wouldn't raise it formally. But let's assume that it needs to happen formally, in which case, again, an issue report is raised, sent to the project board, and the project board will then give guidance, okay, or ask for an exception plan, like we've said above here. So let's assume this was a good idea. They might want some numbers around that good idea, like how long will it take, how much will it cost, and so on. And if that would blow tolerance, then they'd ask for an exception plan. If it can be done within tolerance, then the project manager would say yes. If the project board has said yes, let's go ahead and implement that and take corrective action. So let's now look at the process, the steps, if you will, of issue and change control procedure. Step number 1. First of all, whenever an issue occurs, it needs to be captured in some way. One of the first decisions that needs to be made is this going to be managed formally or informally? It may not be a choice. For example, if it's a request for change, it will have to be done formally. And in the case of a formal issue, then we'll be using the issue register. We'll need to enter information in terms of the issue type, how severe it is, what its priority is, and give it a unique identification number, normally alphanumeric. This severity and priority scales were the ones I mentioned a few slides ago when I talked about the executive of the project board would agree what these scales are. Step number 2 is to examine the issue. This is called impact analysis. Now, as a result of examining the issue report, remember I'm saying it's a formal one rather than informal, will need to be updated with the results of this impact analysis, as will the issue register. Aspects that will need to be looked at will be the project performance targets, time, cost, quality, benefits, and so on, seeing exactly what this issue would have in terms of impact on such targets. We want to look at the business case to see what, if any, the impact would be on the business case. Very often it would have some impact on the investment analysis. Do you remember I mentioned that whenever an issue is raised, it can produce a change to the risk situation, either by creating new risks. For example, if the request for change was to use a leading edge technology that is fairly new, there might be risks around whether it truly works yet, as it's a fairly new technology. So the risk register would need to be updated. Again, using the severity and priority scales would need to be modified as a result of carrying out your impact analysis. It's one thing back here when the person who raised it said, oh, it's not very severe, but it's very high priority, very important. And over here you realise, well, perhaps it's not so important. And by the way, it is quite a severe change because now we've looked at the impact. This would cause a large increase in costs, for example. And such impacts are to include relevant input from the customer side, from the business side, and the supplier side. You'll recognise that, I'm sure, as the 3 focus areas of the project board: the senior user, the executive, and the senior supplier. I've put here project board as a question. Indeed, might depend on whether they've set up a change authority to deal with any issues. But very often, as I've suggested here, they'll need to get involved. Step 3. This is the proposed step. And here what we'll be looking at is in terms of what options we've got for actually implementing whatever this issue is about. We'd look at the impact on one side. Is it going to reduce cost? Is it going to reduce time? Is it going to increase quality? Is it going to change scope in some way? Scope, remember, is what's included and what isn't. Will it improve benefits? Will it reduce risks? There would be the impacts, and then looking at the advantages if we went with option A or option B or option C. Remember, these are alternative options. Would it reduce cost? Would it reduce time, increase quality, and so on and so forth? And it'll be a matter of weighing up these alternative options, and yes, you've guessed it, you need to make a decision. And that brings us to the decide step, step 4. Either the project manager can resolve this and agree and decide it, if that's within their authority, or it needs to be sent to the project board via an issue report. Or if as a result of proposing this alternative option, you may need to raise an exception report. Step 5, once that's been decided whether or not to proceed, then it's to implement it. If it's an exception report that's been sent, then the project manager would need to raise an exception plan, which will need to be approved by the project board at an exception assessment. But it might be, if it's within the project manager's remit, that it really means raising a new or modified work package. So step 5 is the final step. Just to raise a point I came up with at the beginning of this slide, and that is that you would have to use an issue report whenever the issue needs to be handled formally. If it's informal, we can use the daily log, and I'll discuss that shortly. So let's look at the project issue roles yet again. The senior user, they are responsible for accurately specifying the user's needs, and therefore that the products are fit for purpose. What's that got to do with issues? Well, they would help prioritize user opinions and get involved with making decisions on any specific issues. The senior supplier, they're responsible for making sure that product creation proposals are both feasible and realistic. In common language, that the project is doable and the outcome is sensible. They would brief the project board on any specialist issues, playing an important role, as I'm sure you can see. Third, the project manager, responsible of course during a stage for all the day-to-day management. That individual manages all the issues and of course the risks. Team managers ensure the production of allocated products within a work package. They're there to manage the specialist team. As I said earlier, it could be the project manager. You see, you'll always have a team manager. It's just whether it's going to be someone else other than the project manager. And with regard to issues, they're there to manage the work package risks and, of course, any issues. That brings us to project support. They can do almost any type of support to the project, generally called administration and support, and they're there to administer change control and any project issues. I'll say one more time, if you haven't got project support, usually a central office, then the project manager will have to do it themselves or delegate it to an individual on a project by project basis. So let's now dive into the detail. I've mentioned several times, if an issue is to be managed formally, you'll need to have an issue report. We're going to quickly look at the issue report and the issue register here, because there is some common data in each. Although they're different and their purposes are different, some of the information is repeated for good reason in both. Let's start off then. Each issue needs a unique identifier. Do you remember configuration management? We need to make sure that each one can be uniquely identified, typically numeric or alphanumeric, as shown in the issue register. We're talking here about the issue report, don't forget. Now, an issue report contains a description of the issue, the impact assessment and recommendations for any of the specific issue types. And it is only created for issues are that to be handled formally. Now just look here, description, impact, assessment and recommendations. So the issue report is a living document. When it's raised and whoever fills it out, they can only fill out certain information. But as the issue proceeds through the steps that I've covered already, more information is known and the other sections can be filled in. And one more time, informal issues are managed in a daily log. This is set up before the project starts in the starting up a project process. And the daily log is used to capture all issues and risks in starting up a project. But once we get to the initiation stage, where the initiating a project process is used, then any issues that needs to be managed formally are taken out of the daily log and put in the issue register. However, throughout the rest of the project, if any issues can be done informally, that's the project manager's choice, then they could put the similar information I'm sharing with you here, but do it in a daily log in obviously a much more simplified and more informal manner. Let's continue. The issue type. Remember I said there's 3 flavors. Here they are again. You'd name which one this is, the date it was raised, and who raised it. The issue report author. This is the person who created the issue report. You see, the issue report can only be formally raised by the project manager. So why not make sure that your specialist team use a similar format when they're advising you of any issues. The issue description in common language, but including the cause of the issue and its impact. Now you may be asking yourself, you haven't done an impact analysis yet, and that would be fair, in which case this would be a best guess or even an assumption on behalf of those who've raised it. This would be updated later with more precise information after the impact analysis has occurred. And the priority and severity, whatever those scales have been chosen to be, here you'd use them. Using chosen categories should be re-evaluated after impact analysis, like I said earlier, and the severity, use the chosen scale. This will often indicate what management level will be required to make the decision. If it's very severe, then it would need to go to the project board, for example. But a minor one could be managed by the project manager or possibly even the team manager if that's been agreed. Still on the issue report, you'll have a section on the impact analysis. This is a detailed analysis of the likely issue impact, and it possibly include impacts on other products. Often the case if you think about it. If you change the steering mechanism on a car, for example, that will almost certainly have impact on the type of tyres and suspension settings. The recommendation, the final one, what the project manager believes should be done to resolve the issue and why such actions should be taken. The decision, whoever it is that needs to make this. And I showed you the different options the project board could take here: accept, reject, defer or grant concession. Also included in the issue report is the status and closure date. So the status and closure date, the current status of the issue and the date of the last update, fairly straightforward, and the date the issue was closed. In other words, you can't fill this in until that has actually happened, obviously. So the issue report is created when capturing the issues, updated when the issue has been examined, and proposals have been identified for issue resolution. So listen, PRINCE2 is a sensible method, and it's up to you to implement and tailor it to suit your project. If you're using a small, fairly low-risk project, then the issue report will want to be filled out simply and in a straightforward manner. And filling out an issue report may be only the work of a few minutes. It could, for example, be sent via an email. So the issue report is updated to record the chosen option, do you remember that? And then again when the implementation has been verified and the issue is closed. So you can see this provides a great audit trail, but more important than that, it's a living progress report for the project manager to make sure issues are properly managed and closed out appropriately. So now get on to the issue register. Again, you'll see some very similar phrases here. The issue identifier, I've covered that already. The issue type, the date it was raised, who raised it, the issue report author, the issue description, priority and severity, and the status and closure date. So you can see that the issue register contains all issues over the life of the project, whereas the issue report, there was one raised for each issue. Okay, final slide. Before finishing off this first video, I want to visit again configuration management. Now, in the initiating a project process, that's in the initiation stage, the project initiation documentation, PID, is created. There are 4 strategy documents in that, and a strategy document really says, how are we going to do this for this particular project? So the configuration management strategy document says, how are we going to apply configuration management to this project? An internal, simple, low risk, short timescale project, you might be applying configuration management in a simple way. And within the configuration management strategy, the only pieces I want to pull to your attention now are the parts that relate to issues. There's a section called Issue and Change Control Procedure, which, as it suggests, describes exactly what procedures will be used. And such a procedure should cover how issues are captured, examined, how they're proposed, and how they are decided and implemented. Also within the configuration management strategy, by the way, at the time this document is created, the issue register is set up, and any issues that were held on the daily log that need to be managed now formally will be transferred to the issue register. So this document, the configuration management strategy, defines the composition and format of the issue register and the configuration item records. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to show you how the PRINCE2 method deals with issues throughout the whole of the project. Also in the configuration management strategy is reporting. This will set down report composition and format. And what we're interested here is the issue report. Here it will say exactly what that looks like, how it's to be manifested, is it going to be electronic, and also the product status account. Because of course, issues have the potential to change products, and therefore the product status account is relevant. It talks about the purpose, timing and recipients of these products, including reviewing the performance of the procedures. In other words, the configuration management strategy is hand in glove with how exactly issues are going to be managed. The timing of configuration management and issue change control activities. When formal activities be undertaken, for example, if you're going to carry out configuration audits. Now, it's a bit of a strange one, this, because if you think about it, when exactly are you going to carry out configuration management during a stage? Well, with regard to issues, it depends if any issues are raised. So you really couldn't expect to say here, we're going to raise an issue 3 weeks into this stage. But nevertheless, this is an attempt to show you the more formal ones. For example, we will have an audit as part of preparing for an end stage assessment. And then roles and responsibilities. Who will be responsible for which aspects of what procedures? So it describes whether you're going to use the project board to authorize all changes, or whether they're going to set up a change authority and or a change budget. If it's a change authority, are they delegating all issues to the change authority or just some of them? And how these are to be set up, reviewed, approved and operated, etc. In other words, this will set out the configuration management roles and responsibilities within this project. Finally, scales for priority and severity. These are used for prioritizing requests for changes of specifications and the relevant management levels needed to make decisions on these various levels of severity. And that brings us nicely to the end of this first video. Remember, there are 2 more. So I'll look forward to your company again on part 2 of my PRINCE2 Issue Management Demystified videos. I'm Dave Litton, so see you on the next video. Bye for now.